This is Innovation and Leadership, where we interview Navy SEALs, venture capitalists, pro athletes, best-selling authors, Hollywood filmmakers, really as many different kinds of high achievers as we can get to come on the show. Today's episode is going to be from our mini-series that we created with Corporate Alliance, asking top CEOs and executives and entrepreneurs who have had very large exits, specifically about their thoughts on leadership and people. Today on the show, we've got John Pestana. He very well known here for being a co-founder of Omniture that was sold to Adobe.
Lots of times people are high performers because they're also dishonest people, which then can bite you in the end. So, we've had salespeople who really sold a lot, but they did it by kind of selling future product a little too much, right? Which then kind of makes it then harder for customer service people to support.
This is another episode of our Innovation and Leadership series where we interview pro athletes, world-class musicians, CEOs, Hollywood filmmakers, and a wide variety of other high achievers. Also, I want to talk to you about one of our show's sponsors. I met these guys back on episode 6. CEO Zach Smith was telling me all about starting a skateboard company and how much he hated doing the bookkeeping for a skateboard shop, and how he really got led to start this business, Bookly, that's a hybrid combining bookkeeping software and human services. And I'll tell you why I let them become a sponsor. It's because I use their service now. I don't love paying $50 an hour for bookkeepers to do stuff that I know software could do way, way cheaper. But I don't love bookkeeping at all. So I want a real live human who knows what they're talking about to help me with the stuff I don't understand. Probably the straw that broke the camel's back for me, though, the thing that put me over the top was that they could do my taxes and payroll also. So totally suggest checking them out. Go to their website, bookly.co, and check out their flat rates. I've been super happy with them. So now on to today's episode. John, for people who aren't familiar with that, before we talk about ObservePoint, can you give people some of the metrics or why that was such a landmark deal?
Sure. So my first software company was called Omniture, and I co-founded that with a gentleman by the name of Josh James. And we started it in 1996, ended up taking it public in 2006, and then sold it to Adobe in 2009. And at that time, we were the largest, I believe, software sale in the history of Utah, which we sold to them for $1.8 billion.
Well, I mean, it's been such a landmark deal that is constantly referred to in this market years and years later. I mean, I just read a Forbes article week before last about some of the big companies in Utah today, and they're referencing, back to the Omniture deal of really putting Utah on the market map in some ways.
That probably was that article with Josh's company, I think, was featured in that one. Mentioned Domo, which is Josh, my old partner's new company, is called Domo.
Yeah, I think it was Josh and Aaron Sconard at Pluralsight, and I think Ryan Smith at Qualtrics.
Dave Elkington, I believe.
Okay, I bet you're right. So talk about what happened next. So have this landmark exit, and then you recognize that there were still some problems to be solved in the world.
Yeah. Well, actually, immediately what happened next is I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be, like I think a lot of people go through when they have a major exit. And, I was honestly trying to just even diversify some money, things like that, did some real estate. While I was doing that, I was also thinking about, okay, what could I be doing next? And that's where another friend of mine who had an exit in a company named Rob Ciolis, he was looking for his next gig. And so we came up with the idea of ObservePoint. And what ObservePoint is we're a data governance platform that basically helps people make sure all the online marketing technologies on their website are actually functioning and collecting data properly. And I realize for a lot of listeners that probably doesn't mean much of anything, but in my previous company, we were the largest web analytics tracking system online. We tracked trillions of page views. So much data that's mind-boggling. And there's literally no person who's ever been on the internet who has not interacted with my old technology that I invented. And then obviously with the team. And so in that process of tracking, when you have a website that has millions of pages and you're trying to put what they're called little tags on these pages, it's really hard to keep track of that it's being implemented across the entire website. And so at ObservePoint, we've developed an automated system that validates that the tags are properly placed on the website, that they're implemented and collecting data that people can trust, because if you're an online marketer and you're spending millions of dollars on keywords, you need to make sure that they're collecting that information properly so that when you see, one keyword is performing better than another, you know that you can trust all that information you're looking at. So that was kind of, we decided to get together and do it again and not be honestly a little bored is what I was becoming.
And so just for people to maybe, if they're thinking, why do I want to go to observepoint.com and look into this? Help give the listeners just a little bit of context of, once you have that data and you can have trust in that kind of data, what's an example of a decision you might make different as a leader of an organization or leading a marketing company or something like this?
Sure. Well, in the online marketing world, it's really notorious for people to like present data in board meetings and places like that. And they'll have little asterisks with like excuses on why they aren't completely confident in this data. And normally those are implementation problems that, or like the code got taken off the website for a little while. I mean, it happens at all the biggest companies. And so what happens is every time things like that start happening, you start degrading the trust in the data you're presenting to where you get to a point where nobody in the organization trusts anything that anybody's looking at. But you want to be able to be responsive, right? You want to be able to, when you look at information and there's good information there, you want to say, you know what, we can make quick decisions with this information because we trust it. A good example of that would be, if you did see that like a certain word was converting better than another keyword, that you could say, oh, let's buy more of that. But right now, most people will see, like if a word was converting at 2 or 3 times better than other things, they're like, oh, I wonder what's wrong there. We must have accidentally tagged that, or, something's going off. They will not trust that. They'll instantly go into, let's QA that and figure out what went wrong.
Interesting. Do you ever, I know you're really into books. Do you ever read the classic, The Good to Great, Jim Collins book?
Yeah.
It just makes me think of that Churchill reference of the Office of Statistics, right?
Yeah.
Where he wanted the real numbers, not. Anyways.
Yeah, I always thought it was funny because at Omniture, one of the big things that was different about us, like when we looked at website traffic, we were actually tracking every single page view that was happening on the website. And I would laugh every time when somebody would be like, but ComScore says this. And I'm like, well, yeah, that's all sampled data. We literally tracked every single person. This is not statistics. This is just data collection.
Mm. Well, when you think about lessons that you learned from the roller coaster at Omniture, how has that turned into, specifically as we're talking about leadership and people, what are things that you were able to do better at ObservePoint because of your Omniture experience?
I was excited to start ObservePoint just from the basis of having learned a lot and hopefully not to make so many mistakes, which is still depressing when I think about how many mistakes I make at ObservePoint. You'd think I'd learned by now. But, I definitely have learned a lot more patience, which is a good thing. I was actually pretty bad at a Omniture where, we'd be working 24/7, and I used to always joke that the reason why we would beat our competitors is because they were sleeping. And I've learned a lot, especially with family and things like that, is like, sometimes it's okay to go at a reasonable pace, even though I still like to push people hard. But I think I've learned a little bit that, hey, it's okay. We can sometimes wait till tomorrow, and I don't have to stay up until 3 o'clock in the morning to get this done. And I think that comes just with time of learning that sometimes, it's not as important as you think it is sometimes. And that definitely, I think, helps with relationships with family and kids and wife and all that.
Also, I want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors, Skillshare. They're doing a promo for us, for everybody listening to the show. It's skillshare.com/leader, where they're going to let anybody get 2 months of access to their 18,000 classes for just 99 cents. at that code, skillshare.com/leader. And I think for me, one of the reasons that I like Skillshare and probably like the classes that are most attractive to me are the really high credibility ones. Like, you can learn email marketing from MailChimp. I mean, these are the guys that make $500 million a year sending email out for their customers. They've got the data. They're legitimate experts on the subject. And as I'm getting advice, I know that I should be building my list better than I am. That's the kind of people that I want to get my advice from, and you can get it right there on those classes. One last time, if you want that 99 cents for the 2 months, it's skillshare.com/leader. So thinking about the wild ride of Omniture, and now, hopefully the wiser, more experienced version of you at the new company here, ObservePoint, what do you feel like is one of the best lessons you learned at Omniture that you've been able to implement now at ObservePoint?
I think it's a hard question, actually. Like, I think of lots of things, that I've learned. I've changed a lot about myself, how I approach things. I had mentioned definitely have a little more patience in how I look at things. I've definitely learned, about how to listen to customers a lot better, how to even simple things like how to price a product, how to determine if there is a market for something. All those things are things that I had to learn the really hard way before that I understand a lot better now. The surprising thing is, even with all of that information, it's still just as hard, right? It's amazing how hard it is to start a company, to get customers onboarded, to deal with the interactions of customers, with employees, with just everybody involved, and keeping everybody happy. I joke a lot that it's like trying to keep a rock band together. You're just trying to keep everybody moving the ship forward, just keep the band together, and that's one of the keys to success. But I definitely like where we're at. I like the people that I'm working with, and that's the key to, honestly, to any company. And one of the things I did learn at Omniture was to not tolerate jerks at companies. And no matter how much value they bring to the company, maybe let's say a sales guy or something like that, if somebody's a jerk, they're just poison to a company, and just get rid of them. Because it's funny, it's like a breath of fresh air when you get rid of people who are toxic. Everybody in the company will literally come up to you and say, thank you. Oh my gosh, everything feels so much better now that negative, the negative person is gone.
Yeah, it's and I want to talk about the sales book that you've turned me on to here. But I've heard something about that, of like toxic numbers, where you've got this high performer so people don't get rid of them, but they're not taking into consideration how much everybody else's numbers are going down because you've got somebody like that contaminating things, huh?
Yeah, it's not worth it. And lots of times people are high performers because they're also dishonest people, which then can bite you in the end. So, we've had salespeople who really sold a lot, but they did it by kind of selling future product a little too much, right? Which then kind of makes it then harder for customer service people to support that sale, because they sold the version that's 3 versions away, right? And in the software world, it's like, look, sell what we have, and you can tell them that we have some stuff coming, but don't sell them on things that we don't completely have. I mean, I think it's actually great to inform people of, hey, here's our roadmap, and these are things that we're coming out with, but be patient and come with us. But sometimes I think sales guys get a little zealous, and they'll sell a little too much vaporware sometimes, which then gets the whole company in trouble, right? And everybody wants to make those people happy, so we work our best to make sure that it does become reality, but it can cause a lot of stress in a company.
Yeah. So let's talk about this for 1 second. Sales is exceedingly people-centric. This book, How to Become a Rainmaker by Jeffrey Fox, that you guys made mandatory reading to sell at Omniture. What is it about that book?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a great book, and we recommended that to our sales guys at Omniture, and um, I've loved the book because it's so simple, and I'm a simple person, and so one of the things I really like in the book, it talks about everybody's somebody, and I've always been even though I'm more of a product person, I've always been a salesperson too, and I like to treat everybody like they're my friend and family. And when you treat everybody like they're somebody, you're treating them like they're important, whether they're the waiter at your table or whether they're the CEO of Apple. I honestly wouldn't treat my waiter any differently than I would the CEO of Apple. And I think that brings a positive energy to the company. Everybody knows that they're important. Everybody knows that you care about them, and it makes it so that just I think overall people are very positive in the business, and it makes them want to work hard for you. And then obviously your customers know that you actually care about them too, and that you're doing things for the right reasons. It's funny. Even though I charge a lot of money for a lot of my products, I I never put that first. I just know that if I can make a customer happy and bring them tremendous value, they they will want to pay me a lot of money for what I'm doing. And the same, and I think that principle in that book applies there too, where when you're treating them well, treating them like their family, and you're just over delivering for them, that ends up with great results.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like it would apply anywhere in your life. I mean, you and I are both members of the Corporate Alliance groups, the C4 group. Um, have you seen anybody there that you feel like um, by being that way, it was able to build a friendship that probably wouldn't have happened otherwise?
I've met a lot of great people uh, through the C4 group. Um, Even some now of my super close friends. Um, I've always been impressed with almost everybody there on how they're always so friendly and treat people. I think sometimes that's probably I don't I don't know if they're like that to everybody, because lots of times I do realize that because of who I am in the community, lots of times people are just nice to me no matter what. Um, but I definitely I think most of them are actually pretty decent people. One of my really good friends that I've made out of it is James Bullington, um, and just such a genuine person, and I've enjoyed even though getting to know him, even though he's actually in real estate, right? And where I'm in software, there's still been a lot of things that I've learned from him because as I see how he's a great networker and he cares and gets to know people, right? And have watched him like he holds a golf tournament for a lot of his friends each year, and and so I've been inspired by watching people like that.
When you think about his approach, I mean, it seems like almost anybody in real estate would claim to be a people person and would
Yeah,
claim that I wouldn't treat the CEO of Apple different, right? Um,
yeah.
what do you think it is in his case that he's able to deliver on that ideal?
Well, I do think it comes very naturally for him, and that is, I think, an important thing in life to understand your personality traits and what comes naturally to you. Um, I don't know if you've read the book Strength Finder.
Love it.
I'm a huge believer in that. That don't worry about your weaknesses. Understand your strengths and how you can contribute. So I do own quite a bit of real estate in some apartment complexes, and we actually use Strength Finder tests to when we hire our managers because we've determined what skill sets a successful manager have, and we make sure that any of our managers that we're hiring have the necessary people skills to be an apartment complex manager. Because you can imagine that that can be a hard task, right? Because you're dealing with a lot of emotional people when it's their living situation, right? And and so I do think somebody like a James Bullington who does great at real estate, a lot of those characteristics of being a networker for him come very naturally.
You know, I when I'm pitching that book to people or clients that I'm trying to get to read it, right? I talk about Michael Jordan didn't make much money playing baseball. Why don't we
Yeah.
help you find out what your basketball is so we can have you spend a lot of time doubling down on your basketball, right?
No, and it's so true. And so many people, it's like our society doesn't do that for some reason. Our society is all about understand your weaknesses and work on them. It's like so crazy and backwards. Um, if everybody just really focused on what they're great at, somebody else will fill in your weaknesses. It's actually how I've hired my entire company. So my business partner, Rob Ciolis, is a wonderful individual, and he is a great organizer and keeping, he's kind of the captain of the ship, right? And I'm totally ADD. I'm like all over the place, but I come up with ideas faster than most people. And I have tons of empathy, and that helps me see situations that other people can't see. I mean, there's been many times in my career where I've come into a meeting and people have been discussing things for 30 minutes and can't find an answer. And I walk in and I give them an answer in like 2 seconds. And they're like, wow, how did we not see that? And so I have my strengths, but at the same time, then you ask me to really execute that for like a week, and I'm going to struggle, right? Because it's just not my forte. But that's where I learned to have people that complement my skills so that I can turn it over to Rob and he can just keep the ship moving in the direction it needs to go. But if you asked Rob to come up with crazy ideas as fast as I do, it would take him 10 times as long, right? And so just understanding those strengths. And, actually an interesting side note, another great book, if you want to listen to another good book, because for a lot of us, like entrepreneurial types, CEOs, a lot of us are ADD. And there's a great book by Mark Patey called Addicts or Millionaires. And it just talks about people who are ADD and how they either basically become an addict or they become millionaires because of the way that we get so intense into things. But it was a great book that helped my wife understand me.
Okay, I'm literally searching it on audible.com right now because hopefully I don't have to read it and I could just listen to it. But that book sounds awesome.
What's funny is Mark Patey, I know him personally, and he always jokes that there's no ADD person who's ever read his book.
Okay, so I didn't know this is where you were going to go with it. I'm on, I don't know, business number 14, right? And because I've got 4 going right now. And,
yeah.
The previous 10, I'm kind of 2 for 10, right? And
Yeah.
so, and the 2, more than made up for the other 10, blah, blah, blah. But I still am not super stoked about that ratio. Okay.
Yeah.
I am really interested in, because I've made a lot of mistakes in whether it's co-founders or just support staff or different people. I'm interested in how, that self-awareness for yourself, what you have done, like what does that process look like for you? Or what advice would you have for someone like me who wants to find that complementary personality type there?
Yeah. I mean, you just need, the more you understand yourself, the easier it is to look and find your equal opposite, right?
Mm-hmm.
The person who's going to offset you. And so that will be different for everybody, And I love researching stuff. So like, whether it's Myers-Briggs or the Strength Finders or any of these things, I like understanding personalities and then finding a complementary personality. But, like Rob, my current partner, I've known him for, 18 years. And so I had a lot of experience in watching him do his business over a long period of time. And I thought to myself, this would make a good partner for me. Same thing. If you're hiring a technologist, right? I'd say that's probably one of the hardest things for a company is to hire the technologist. Because like when I think about most CEOs, they can do pretty much everything else in the company. If they needed to step in and do the accounting, they might not do it perfectly, but they could do it. They could step in and do the sales. They could step in and do the marketing, but they can't step in and code the product if they're a software company. And that's definitely probably your hardest thing to fill in a company. Luckily, because of my previous life, I had a friend who had worked with me at Omniture, and he had actually moved on and became the CIO of Larry H. Miller Group, and then the head of software engineering for Vivint. And then I was finally able to convince him to come on board actually with us just only last year. But even that situation, he has a counterpart in our organization because he is very introverted and he is an incredible software architect. Well, we have another gentleman who works side by side with him who's more of the extrovert, loves talking about the product, and he heads software engineering. And just finding those complementary people for each other, so that, because we couldn't expect Dave, who's our CTO, to do all those same things because it's just not in his wheel. Well, he probably could even do it fairly successfully, but he prefers not to, right? Just like I'm good at a lot of things, but I just don't really want to do them.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about, like, you look at what you're doing now with ObservePoint, right? And these online marketing folks who need to have better data to base decisions on, or when they go to a board meeting at their big giant company, corporate America, they want people to take them serious because, it's data that people can actually have trust in. As you think about that relationship there of who's doing the presenting and who's doing the gathering and who's doing these things, it really feels like a principle that applies kind of no matter the project, whether it's, getting the data together for the board meeting or like you said, starting an entire company.
Yeah. It's totally true.
Well, listen, I know one of the other people that we were talking about before the show has had a big impact on you and the way you think about others is your own parents. Do you have any examples of stories of them setting the example for you?
Sure. I have grown up with very fortunately, I have wonderful parents, and I know a lot of people love their parents, but like, for example, I think back on my life. I'm a pretty mellow person, and not that I don't have a lot of energy and I get excited about things, but it's very rare that I would ever raise my voice or do things like that. And a lot of that I learned from my parents. In my whole life growing up, I think I can only even remember my parents raising their voice once or twice at me, and I think that's helped me, learn a lot of patience and empathy for people. You know, I've had I've had people crash high-end sports cars that I've loaned them. and and I'm just like, "Oh well, I know you didn't mean to do it." It's just life's short to ever lose your temper, or I just know people never do things really on purpose. Now they might be an idiot and they should have known better because they were doing something stupid. But as I always use the analogy saying, like, nobody ever tries to get in an accident, right? And I really definitely learned that a lot from my parents. I actually learned quite a bit of that even from I had served a mission for my church, and my mission president had taught me a lot of that too, of patience. And of course I've had tons of mentors in my life, from whether it was some of the teachers we had at BYU, to one of our other great mentors that we had actually was Fraser Bullock. I don't know if you know Fraser, and he helped us a ton at Omniture. A lot of our even board members, were great mentors for us. Everybody played their role, from my parents kind of helping shape me, my dad teaching me how to sell. My dad was a salesman for a mortgage company. So, I spent summers out with him, helping him sell. And actually, one of the very first things that wherever I ever learned how to program, my dad had a financial HP calculator. This is back in the 90s, early 90s. And I guess it was like 1990. And I would program his calculator for him so that he could just put in like the ratios and stuff to find out how much money somebody could afford to spend on a home. And it's funny, it was like this big hit in his office, and everybody else in the office ended up having me program their HP calculators to do it.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, so it started, I guess, young, doing some basic programming stuff. Although I didn't do it very long. At Omniture, we hired a great gentleman by the name of Brett Ayer, who was our CTO at Omniture, and Brett's just a genius, and he, led us through all of our technology life cycle there with an incredible team under him too. I mean, I don't mean to mean that not everybody else was contributing. We just had an awesome team. So,
I feel like there's a number of directions I want to talk about that, but the first one is for somebody who has a desire to become more patient. Do you have any exercises that you think we could try, or are there any things that you tell yourself to help, conquer yourself and maybe temptations to not be patient?
To be patient?
I'm saying if someone wants to become a more patient person,
yeah.
Do you have any ideas on things they can tell themselves or little things they can do to help, conquer the temptations to be impatient?
That's a hard thing for me because it really does come so naturally for me.
Yeah.
But I would think just, again, realizing that people aren't trying to piss you off, that they're working hard and that they're trying to, help you. Which I realize sometimes doesn't feel like it. Probably the place where I get the least patient is actually at the airport. I just cannot stand TSA and waiting, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, we do not deserve to be treated like cattle. That's the one place that like pushes my patience to the limit.
Yeah, I actually feel like I know you feel like you didn't really answer the question, but I think you did. I think that. You think about that viewpoint of assuming malicious intent as such a trigger of anger. My hero in life is a guy I actually quit being an entrepreneur just to go apprentice under his company in the consulting world. Name's Terry Warner. He wrote this incredible book called Bonds That Make Us Free and started a company called the Arbinger Institute. And he wrote this book called it's a collection of his papers when he was at Oxford. And his paper is called The Delusions of Anger. Anger and Similar Delusions, I think it's called. And he talks about why is it when somebody smashes into us, in a lineup or something, they bump into us too hard and we look at them just glaring, we're just ticked, right? And we assume that they made us angry. And then as soon as we find out that they were pushed into us, all of a sudden our anger towards them evaporates, and the guy who did the pushing is now the one who's the focus of all our anger. And it's like it's not the act itself, it's our decision that we have decided they harmed us when they could have chosen not to, out of like malice or contempt or something. And having that viewpoint, like you said, like nobody's trying to get in an accident. All of a sudden, like our blaming of them as the fuel for our anger and impatience seems like it would go down.
I think a lot of it stems from, we all have that friend who drives like an idiot all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've told him a million times to like, hey, you should probably drive a little less recklessly. Sometimes those are the people getting accidents, and we think, oh my gosh, I've told you a million times to like not be such an idiot, And I think that makes it difficult for some people.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, this reminds me of something like when I think about what I hate about like an airport and how they treat you there. It all stems from fear. It stems from those employees at that airport have fear that if they don't do the things the specific way that some rule book mandated, they're going to lose their jobs. And when I try and run my companies, I try and make sure my employees know that they are completely empowered to make decisions to make things right. So remember, we all heard about the story about the Delta or the United passenger, right? Who got kicked off the plane, drug off the plane. Of course, we all think that was horrible. And again, the reason why a lot of that was horrible was because they weren't empowered to just, keep offering somebody an amount of money to get off the plane, right? We all know that if they had even probably doubled it, they would have had 6 more people volunteer to get off the plane, right?
And instead, their market cap lost $1 billion.
Yeah, but then I think it regained it all back anyway. It doesn't. But that being said, it still wasn't the right thing to do.
It's still from leave the emotional and moral part out of it. It's a $5 or $6 million settlement there for saving $1,000 on a ticket, And then the human aspect, what's the human cost of what it feels like to tell all your family you work at United? And,
Well,
you know,
totally. Well, so I had a situation where I was running to get a Delta flight, and I could see the gate, and the gate agent looked at me, and it was me and three of my friends. This was back in the Omniture day. We were running as fast as we could to the gate. She looked at us, wagged her finger saying no, and closed the door to the plane. Like, who does that? Right? Now, it's because she's been told we have to have on-time departures. It's like, seriously, we were talking about waiting 30 seconds for us to and then maybe she would have had to refill out one little piece of paperwork, kind of a thing. It's,
but she probably had this initial desire to do you guys a solid. And
I don't know.
Out of fear
finger was what was so weird.
Yeah. Out of fear for her job, like you're talking about, and the rules, then she needs to double down on why she's ignoring you as a human and going for the rules and wags her finger at you to let you know you're the one who messed up. It's not her shutting the door.
Well, I do think that they think that. I think what goes through her head is these are these people who think they can just show up so late, which little does she know I'm actually normally that guy who shows up 2 hours early because it just gives me anxiety to not be there on time, So anyway, I literally could go on for this entire podcast and just things I hate about airports.
Okay, so as a recap here, because I think this is a great place to end episode 1, and we'll have everybody invite back everybody for part 2 of the episode. If you were going to sum up all this stuff we've been talking about for 20 minutes about kind of if people only remember one thing from this episode about how they're going to be with their staff and their coworkers and clients, whatever, what is that piece of advice? How would you wrap it up succinctly?
Well, I think I'd wrap it up and say, remember, it's not just business, it's all personal.
Love it. Okay. Please, everyone, tune in to part 2 of the episode with John that will be coming up next. And John, thanks for making time.
No problem.
Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York, and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million. Anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run, and it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.